Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on preparing for E6 and managing harassment and sexual misconduct compliance in higher education. I'm Sarah Hanadahan, Learning and Content Manager here at VinciWorks. With sweeping regulatory changes shaking up the higher education sector, learning providers have to adapt quickly. From the new condition E6 on preventing harassment and sexual misconduct to the action on free speech, the compliance landscape is becoming more complex for learning providers. As the E6 compliance deadline of August 1st, 2025 quickly approaches, significant changes to governance, training, and procedures are required. At the same time, recent fines by the Office of Students against Sussex University have put a further spotlight on internal policies in the sector. Today, we're going to discuss the vital governance and policy changes, particularly with regard to training that your learning provider is expected to undertake. We'll also show some clips from our new interactive training course on harassment and sexual misconduct, the E6 for higher education providers, and unpack the training offering in this area. But just before we get into this topic today, we wanted to quickly mention that we have a range of upcoming webinars on a wide array of compliance topics that you don't want to miss. The links for those upcoming webinars are coming up in the chat now. You can click on them or forward these to any colleagues who might be interested. So first, on Wednesday, June 18th at 12 p.m. UK time, we have the latest in L&D, trends and transformations in workplace learning. Then on Wednesday, July 2nd at 12 p.m. UK time, we have our webinar on rethinking mental health first aid. And then finally, for now, we have on Wednesday, the 23rd of July, we're going to be doing a year in review of the Labour government, what's changed and what more can we expect in the years ahead. Okay, so let's introduce our panel for today. Joining us today to help us learn more about E6 and harassment and sexual misconduct compliance and showcase our new courses on this topic is Maurizio Caldera, our course development expert. Great to have you with us today, Maurizio.
Thank you. Great to be here. I'm very excited to be talking about this important topic today.
Thank you. And VinciWorks Director of Learning and Content, Nick Henderson-Mayo.
Great to be here, Sarah Hannah. Loads to talk about and share with the audience.
Yes, there definitely is. And I wanted to mention to our audience that if you have any questions that come up or comments to share during this webinar, please do write them into the chat and we will try to answer as many of them as we can as we go through. If we don't get to your question by the end of the webinar, we'll reply to you by email. So please do feel free to write in. As mentioned, we're going to be showing some clips throughout the webinar. And if you want to see more of that, you can write E6 in the chat at any point. Now, just to remind everyone that we'll be talking about harassment and sexual misconduct and seeing some videos that discuss those topics. The webinar will be recorded and you'll get a recording afterwards. So if you feel the need to drop off, that's absolutely not a problem. So Maurizio, to get started, could you tell us a little more about the new courses?
Yeah, of course. So we've been developing a series of courses very much with the OFS guidelines on training in mind. The first of these is a flagship video-led conversational learning course, which has a student and a staff pathway. So essentially, this course consists of videos in the various units, and then the learner is asked a series of questions that are designed to elicit reflection on what they've seen and the topic more generally. So, in that way, we're encouraging much more active engagement and reflection from the learner, very much in keeping with the OFS guidelines on this, which are a part of Condition E6. The units will cover harassment, sexual misconduct, consent, bystander interventions, and freedom of speech. So that's the flagship course, and we're also developing and updating a suite of related courses such as consent on campus, effective interventions, again video-led and still very engaging, but without the conversational element. This is designed, I'd say, more for students and can work very well as a refresher, for instance, or if there are particular issues that prevalent surveys have identified that need to be further addressed. We've also prepared an E6 explainer more for staff, which talks about the duties and expectations and which demystifies the guidelines.
Thank you. And I understand that you've done something really new here.
We have. So what's really exciting here is that the new flagship course that I just mentioned is an interactive course. It's built around conversational learning, as I mentioned, designed to actively engage the learner throughout. Now, conversational learning does pretty much what it says on the tin. It engages a learner in a conversation about these topics. So on the back of the videos, through a series of questions, it's not the multiple choice tick box approach, and there's not necessarily a wrong answer. It's there to explore attitudes, generate empathy and thoughtfulness, and guide the learner towards the learning points. I mean, of course, we've already been engaging learners through various mediums and approaches in our courses for many years, but we felt that in this instance and in this topic area, with students in mind and the OFS guidelines in mind on engagement and reflection, we felt this was the most appropriate approach. This is something that we're using for other courses, and it's particularly useful when you're dealing with behaviours and attitudes.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you. And let's take a quick look at the conversational learning trailer right now. Okay, so that was the trailer for our new conversational learning offering. And you can write CL into the chat to see more about this brand new style of training. And just to clarify, Maurizio, this isn't a one size fits all course, right? There's a student version and a staff version.
Exactly. So as I mentioned, we've created two distinct learning pathways. The student version focuses on what students need to know, what harassment looks like in practice, how to understand consent, how to intervene safely, those kinds of things. And the staff pathway drives deeper into responsibilities, maybe power dynamics, and includes areas like staff on staff misconduct and unconscious bias. And even though the OFS, which is the Office for Students, concerns themselves with the impact and prevalence of these behaviours on students, we thought it was important to expand the staff training to staff on staff harassment, which I think is important because we're here seeking to address the wider culture and the environment, which can impact obviously on students as well.
Yeah, that is a great point. And now let's take a look at a video from the E6 Explainer course that you just mentioned to get an overview of E6.
Condition E6 broadly sets a set of standards around both the prevention of and the processing of allegations of harassment and sexual misconduct where they impact and affect and are made by students. That covers everything from the steps that a provider might take to reduce instances and the prevalence of misconduct and harassment, and also sets rules and standards around when a student makes an allegation or makes a complaint in terms of the support that's offered and the sort of processes that are in place when a student makes or raises that sort of concern. The big picture here is that the Office for Students believes, with good reason, that a significant number of students are experiencing harassment and sexual misconduct and don't know how to report it, don't feel confident to report it, and are inside providers where insufficient steps have been taken to prevent that happening to them in the first place.
Office for Students has introduced a new condition of registration known as Condition E6. From August 2025, every registered higher education provider in England must take meaningful and measurable steps to prevent and respond to harassment and sexual misconduct.
In terms of the definition of students, it's pretty much any student that the provider is responsible for, both in terms of validation and registration and enrolment, and whether or not the delivery of their course has been franchised to someone else. And interestingly, controversially for some, even where you as a university only validate the degree academically of another provider, OFS regards those students as being partly your responsibility to make sure that the standards that are described in the regulation are met. And broadly what OFS is saying is that, look, where a student experiences harassment or sexual misconduct, even if they experience it from someone that is not another student or a member of staff, the provider still has responsibilities around students being able to tell the provider, to apply support for that student, to make sure they're not perhaps academically disadvantaged as a result of those experiences, and so on.
Okay, so there we saw a video from the new course with one of our subject matter experts, Jim Dickinson, talking about the thinking behind the new condition and a broad sense of the duties. We're going to get back to those duties in a minute, but first, Maurizio, I wanted to ask you to share a bit more about the video course format. What is it about this format that you have found really works to get across the learning points?
So the vast majority of our courses are video based, and they include interviews with subject matter experts, drama scenarios, and lived experience interviews, and some voiceover, which you would have heard in that video there. The subject matter expert interviews provide professional insights and bring knowledge and depth to the topic at hand. The whole component of lived experience interviews is also crucial to what we do. And that's a really powerful tool when it comes to creating empathy. And I will say that in this instance, there are some very powerful lived experience interviews, notably one by a rape survivor who's also one of our subject matter experts. And the dramas are a very effective way of bringing those behaviours and actions and interventions to life. And drama allows us to take a more analytical approach. So you as the learner are asked to reflect on what you're seeing. And this is a more productive learning experience rather than just being told that this behaviour is good or this behaviour is not good. So we're always told that narrative and story can engage an audience or a learner much more effectively. And it's certainly true here. And particularly with regard to a student demographic. It's true for all of us, but I think especially so when thinking about this demographic.
Great point. Yeah, that's so true. And this is a good time to break for our first poll today. So our first question for our audience today is, how ready is your institution for the changes coming in August? We're fully prepared, or we've started preparing, but we still have work to do. We are aware of the changes, but haven't started yet. This is the first time I'm hearing of it. Not sure, or not applicable to me. Just to repeat the question one more time, how ready is your institution for the changes coming in August? We're fully prepared. We've started preparing, but still have work to do. We are aware of the changes, but haven't started yet. This is the first time hearing of it, or not sure, not applicable to me. We'll give everyone another moment to click in their answers and then see what our results were for this question. Okay, so 2% of respondents said that they are fully prepared. 79% said that they've started preparing but still have work to do. 7% said we are aware of the changes but have not started yet. 3% said this is the first they're hearing of it. And 9% responded that they are not sure or it's not applicable to them. Those are interesting results. And Nick, I wanted to dive in a bit to Condition E6 itself. Could you give us a quick overview of the new regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. So providers, as many of us on this webinar will know, and it's great to see so many already taking the steps to get started, but we have to take these proactive steps to prevent and address harassment and sexual misconduct that's affecting students under this condition E6. So it was announced in July 2024 after an OFS consultation. And the introduction was driven by evidence of this pressing need for a much more safer campus. An OFS survey had found that 20%, so 1 in 5 students, had experienced unwanted sexual behaviour, with the majority of those incidents happening in a higher education setting. And this E6 condition builds on earlier guidance for the sector, like the 2021 OFS Statement of Expectations, and it makes some of those practices from that 2021 statement mandatory rather than voluntary. All higher education providers registered with the OFS, so that's over 400 institutions in England, must comply with E6 as a condition of their ongoing registration.
Thank you. And what obligations exactly does it put on higher education providers?
So there's a number of different conditions that organizations are going to have to meet in order to kind of be compliant. So providers will have to publish a single comprehensive source of information. So it's known as a CSI. That means that providers have to have a single up-to-date policy hub that clearly sets out all of your institution's policies and procedures relating to harassment and sexual misconduct. Now, that CSI can be a single document that you send around. It can be a web page, an intranet. It has to link to all those detailed policies. It covers everything students and staff have to know in one central location. It has to include things like what behaviours are unacceptable, how to report issues, and how the university will respond if a report is made. Then they also have to take what the regulation calls significant and credible action to protect students. So that's in the form of actual practical steps that will make a real difference, and that will mean policies and training. And the OFS expects universities to tailor their actions to the context, meaning that you want to do a risk assessment to understand where the highest risk places are and then address them step by step. And it also involves students in developing these actions.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. It sounds like the OFS is trying to spearhead a move from paper policies to concrete interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a part of an effort with the new regulation to demonstrably reduce the likelihood of incidents and ensure a swift and very fair handling of those incidents if they do occur.
Yeah, and what other obligations are there?
So there's also a ban on NDAs or other clauses that would silence students in any sorts of settlements or complaints about harassment or sexual misconduct. The ban on NDAs also extends to third parties, so freelancers, visiting tutors working in the university, other organizations at the university, or students themselves might be working with if they're on placement. So it's very, very, very broad. And the aim here is to ensure that students can speak out and get support without any sort of contractual repercussion. There's also the obligation for universities to have a very clear policy on staff-student relationships. So this is a bit where it gets a little bit tricky, because the OFS does actually suggest that a ban on staff having intimate relationships with students that they teach or supervise in a straightforward way, so a straightforward ban would satisfy the requirement there, even if it goes so far to say that the ban is a compliant step under E6. But if you merely discourage that kind of relationship, it's not sufficient on its own. So it's a little bit complicated and it does require a bit of thinking through. And your provider will have to decide exactly how to implement that particular element to it. But you must have rules in place one way or the other.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And there are also obligations around reporting, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I just saw a question in the chat there about whether it applies to Northern Ireland. So it doesn't apply to Northern Ireland, and it doesn't apply to Scotland, so or even Wales. So we're only talking about providers in England, particularly for E6. It doesn't mean this won't cut across to other countries eventually, but at the moment it's only for England. And in terms of reporting, this is also where steps have to be taken by providers, because the regulation says that students have to have a clear, accessible reporting mechanism for harassment or sexual misconduct. And that has to include the ability to report incidents in lots of different ways. So phone, online platforms, email, whatever it might be, they have to have a number of options, and they have to be able to report anonymously if they wish. And VinciWorks does have a reporting solution that we've specifically designed for HE providers, and it's fully compliant with the E6 requirements. It's called OmniTrack, and how it works is that after someone's done the training on E6 and the session is over, the user can then click on the link and then be taken to that secure portal where they'll be asked survey questions on different topics, where you can get more detailed information on any such issue, and then you'll be able to share that link or post QR codes on campus, whatever it may be. So it's called OmniTrack, and we actually developed this software for law firms, and they use it for their money laundering requirements. So it's very, very secure, and we've adapted the software to track and report on all types of sensitive data. And if you do want to see a demo of that particular reporting solution, then you can write OmniTrack into the chat, and we'll get in touch with you about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Nick. And as Nick said, OmniTrack is used by many of our clients already, including some of the world's largest law firms and global corporations for tracking and reporting data. And OmniTrack for E6 is a great way to encourage reporting. But it's not only about reporting. We need training as well. Could you tell us more about that, Maurizio?
Sure. So, but before we go into training, I do want to reiterate what Nick just said about OmniTrack, what you've both been saying. So this survey, and in fact, we just had a question about what indicators are helpful for institutions to evaluate whether training is leading the change. So OmniTrack allows the provider to get a sense of where the problems might lie, who's on the receiving end, what age group, what gender, are they home students, are they international students, a sense of the nature of these incidents and where they're taking place. Are they on placements? Are they on campus, off campus? Now, this is crucial because it allows the provider to understand where the issues are arising in order that they can take targeted action. And it demonstrates to the OFS that they're being proactive about solutions. You would have heard Jim Dickinson saying earlier on, the video needs to be demonstrable. This is a part of that demonstrable aspect, because without that data, it's going to have to be a much more general approach, which might not be so effective. As far as the training is concerned, starting in this up-and-coming academic year, providers must offer training to all students on sexual misconduct and harassment. So this training should educate students on consent, what constitutes harassment, how to be an active bystander, and how to seek help. The OFS expects training to be evidence-based and delivered by people with appropriate expertise. All staff and students must be trained on the content of the single source of information and their responsibilities in preventing and responding to harassment. And regular refreshers should be provided as well to keep that awareness high. So the training should involve interactivity and offer opportunities to the learner, for the learner to reflect on what they're seeing and what they're learning.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I wanted to mention that we have a free comprehensive guide to Condition E6, including a detailed overview of the regulation, guidance for staff, administration, and students, enforcement, balancing harassment and free speech, and more, all in this guide. And the link for that is coming up in the chat now. Now, Maurizio, another question. So there are still actually more requirements under the regulation, right?
Yeah, so the regulation also stipulates that learning providers must provide appropriate support to any student affected by harassment and sexual misconduct. So this can include support for students who report incidents or who make allegations, and those who've experienced or been victims of misconduct, and students who are also accused or otherwise involved, and the support should be available whether or not a student chooses to make a formal complaint. Now, that support can range from emotional support to practical help with, say, reporting to the police, or academic accommodations like deadline extensions if you know the student is impacted negatively. And of course, none of this would be any of use if it's not accessible and clearly communicated. So we come back to the single source of information and why it's so important. The thinking there is that students shouldn't have to go shopping around these systems to find support or guidance, that it's in one place, it's a one-stop shop. And the single source of information needs to be prominently published without any login required in a location easily accessed by all. And each year the provider must directly notify all students about its existence and how to access it.
Yeah, that does sound really crucial. And what about the duties on free speech and harassment?
Okay, so we're going to get into free speech more in the next section because I know that's a complicated area. But in terms of E6, yes, there's an obligation for the condition to be implemented in a manner consistent with freedom of speech principles. In other words, that the prevention of harassment does not unintentionally stifle open debate or academic freedom of speech. So providers are required to balance their harassment policies with the need to protect lawful free speech.
Thank you for that, Maurizio. And now we wanted to share another clip from the course that provides an introduction to sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment is behaviour that is based on sex or that is sexual in nature and that is unwelcome to the person on the receiving end of it, so that causes a hostile or intimidating environment for that person. Sexual harassment is on a continuum of behaviour that can range from words, gestures, through to touching and sexual assault.
Sexual violence and sexually abusive behaviours cover quite a wide spectrum, really. It would be rape, it would be a coerced sexual act of one kind or another, but also unwanted touching, groping, whether on public transport or in a pub or in a house or in a classroom, in fact, or a lecture studio.
On one hand, you have the most extreme type of sexual violence, which is rape, which is something unfortunately I experienced. But then you also have sexual assault, which means unwanted groping and sort of physical touching. and sexual harassment, which is a more verbal sense of making somebody feel uncomfortable by saying sexual things to them in a way that is not appreciated and makes them feel intimidated.
Do you do student discount?
Yeah, you got a card? Okay, that'll be $3.50. So what are you studying then?
I'm doing engineering.
Engineering? Don't tell me you're going to hide that gorgeous body underneath a boiler suit all day. Shouldn't be allowed.
Excuse me?
I paid you a compliment.
Okay.
I paid you a compliment, didn't I? Well, you should appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Can I have my change, please?
Bitch.
And then, of course, you have other forms of sexual violence, which are, I guess you can say, more technologically dependent, right? So upskirting, using your phone to take intimate photos of somebody when they're asleep and distributing those photos. There's other forms that we often don't think of, taking off a condom without your partner's consent, and therefore having sex with them unprotected. That is also another form of sexual violence. So there's a whole range of experiences out there which don't involve the consent of another person and which can have long-lasting impacts on them if it happens to them.
Okay, so Maurizio, could you take us through what we saw in that video?
Sure. So that was an introductory video on the sexual harassment and misconduct unit, which includes definitions, the type of things that it includes, and then the drama, of course, that showed a case of a student harassment. And as I mentioned earlier, this video, like all the others, is followed by a series of questions asking the learner to reflect on what they've seen, explore definitions, cite examples, exploring social media, for instance, and its use in sexual misconduct and harassment.
Okay, thank you so much. And that actually brings us right to our next poll. Our next question is, what area do one moment, let's get the right poll up there. Okay, great. What area do you find most challenging to address when it comes to harassment and sexual misconduct? Is it staff-student relationships, consistent investigation procedures, creating a culture of reporting, training and awareness, freedom of speech, or we're not sure where to start? We'll ask the question one more time. What area do you find most challenging to address when it comes to harassment and sexual misconduct? Is it staff-student relationships, consistent investigation procedures, creating a culture of reporting, training and awareness, freedom of speech, or we're not sure where to start? So we'll just give everybody another moment or two to click in their answers, and then we'll see what our results were from our audience. Okay, so we have our results. 11% of our audience said that the most challenging area to address when it comes to harassment and sexual misconduct is staff-student relationships. 14 of you said it is consistent investigation procedures. 35%, that's the largest group here, said creating a culture of reporting. 20% said training and awareness. 14% said freedom of speech. 7% said they're not sure where to start. So that's quite an interesting spread. Nick, and once E6 comes into force, what kind of regulatory shift should universities expect from the OFS?
We'll actually have to kind of take action on all those areas, because once E6 takes effect, we're likely to see the OFS taking a much more active and proactive enforcement role when it comes to all those aspects of harassment and sexual misconduct. This is not really just a policy update. It is a formal condition of registration for the learning provider. So in order to be able to continue operating, you need to take this very seriously. And that means if a provider is found to be in breach of that condition of E6, then the OFS can take significant action. It could take levy fines. It could implement enhanced monitoring, could even suspend access to student loan funding, or in the most serious cases, a provider could even be deregistered altogether.
Okay, that sounds serious. And are those sanctions theoretical, or is there precedent for this kind of enforcement?
There is very real precedent. The OFS has already issued some substantial fines in other areas where it regulates. So there was a £60,000 fine for breaching a student protection condition, and then the £285,000 fine against the University of Sussex in the recent free speech case that made a lot of headlines in the country. And while those weren't under E6 specifically, they do show that the regulator is very prepared to use its enforcement powers, even publicly, and especially against well-known institutions as well.
Thank you. And what kind of E6 breaches might lead to those kinds of penalties?
I mean, it's really going to depend on how serious the breach is and also how the institution responds. That's going to be very, very crucial. So a small oversight, let's say, you miss a policy update, it could lead to a warning if it's fixed, promptly. But if there's evidence of systemic failure, if you're not delivering training, if you're failing to investigate reports properly, continuing to use NDAs after being told not to, that's where we're likely to see much more real consequences. And the OFS is able to issue public notices of non-compliance, which, if not, even though they're not financial, they can, obviously carry a reputational impact as well.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent point. And thank you for that, Nick. And just before we move on, we have another download for you, which is a quick checklist for your E6 preparations, which is also coming up in the chat now. And you are welcome to download that for free from the chat now. And speaking of the University of Sussex and the free speech case, that reminds me, as promised earlier, I wanted to go back into the topic of free speech in a little bit more detail. So, Nick, we've talked a bit about the balance between harassment policies and academic freedom, but can we take a step back for a moment? What is the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act exactly?
So this piece of legislation from 2023, it was passed by the previous Conservative government, and it puts a legal duty on universities and colleges in England to actively protect free speech on campus. So it's not just about avoiding censorship, it requires institutions to promote lawful free expression and academic freedom, and that covers external speakers, staff, visiting guests to the institution, students as well.
Great, thank you. And where does it come from? Why was this law introduced in the first place?
So there was some concerns in recent years from the previous government that universities were becoming too risk averse, that controversial reviews, particularly around political or social issues, were being shut down too easily by institutions. There was some high-profile incidents of cancelled speakers. There was complaints about bias, and then there was some individual cases of students or academics being disciplined because they expressed unpopular but lawful views. So the government had introduced this act to reinforce freedom of speech within the law as foundational in higher education. Although the legislation was passed before the election last year, it was the current Labour government that was to bring it in, and it took some time to bring it into force. So only just recently actually decided to bring in sections 1, 2 and 5 of the Act, which are going to come into force also on the 1st of August this year. Sections 3 and 4 of the Act are not coming into force yet. Those are subject to further review. Those sections 3 and 4, which are not coming into force on the 1st of August, are around extending those protections to student unions and also allowing civil claims for free speech breaches. So we're not expecting to see that brought in the near future, at least, but they are still on the statute books.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick, for that. And Maurizio, how does that relate to E6 exactly?
So E6 is all about preventing and responding to harassment, sexual misconduct as it relates to students. But there is a clause in there which specifically states that learning providers must comply with it in a way that's consistent with freedom of speech principles, which is a direct nod to the 2023 Act. It means you can't just write a zero tolerance policy on harassment that ends up banning legitimate academic debate.
Okay, thank you. And so what kinds of obligations does that create for universities under both frameworks?
It means that providers do have to thread a needle. Under E6, you must protect students from harassment, but under the Free Speech Act, you also have to protect lawful expression, even if that expression offends someone. And E6 does go further than the Equality Act in its definition of harassment, which is worth bearing in mind. So that it's seeking to protect everyone beyond the protected characteristics that are included under the Equality Act.
Great. And so it sounds like it's not just about writing policies, but rather it's about making sure they don't conflict with each other as well.
Exactly. That said, there are many fraught cases, and I'm sure we can all think of examples where one person's freedom of speech is another person's harassment. What's important is that all learning providers are clear to their students on day one what's expected of them and how they are protected. Certainly in an academic setting, tutors should be able to express situations and beliefs that might be problematic for certain students, as long as those students are not targeted individually. Policies must be legally sound and practically balanced. So universities, are being told by the OFS, you need to create safe, respectful learning environments, but you can't shut down difficult conversations to do it.
Okay. And that balance between creating safe environments and protecting open debate becomes especially important when universities and colleges are developing policies. It's important that we foster a healthy debate and not shut it down. And on that note, we actually have 2 policy templates for you on free speech and also harassment and sexual misconduct. These policies you can download as Word documents and use them as a starting point and adapt them to your own policy development process. And the link to download those is coming up in the chat now. And this is a great place to break for our next poll today. And the question for our next poll is, how confident are you that your policies align with free speech principles under the new legislation? Very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, we haven't reviewed them yet, or not sure, not my area. I'll just repeat the question one more time. How confident are you that your policies align with free speech principles under the new legislation? Very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, we haven't reviewed them yet, or not sure, not my area. We'll give everyone another moment to click in their answers and then see what the results were from our audience. Okay, so interesting spread here. 9% of you said that you are very confident that your policies align with free speech principles under the new legislation. 59% said, and that's great to see that they're somewhat confident that their policies align with free speech principles under the new legislation. 10% said that they're not confident. 6% said that they have not reviewed them yet, and 17% said that they're not sure or that's not my area. Those are some interesting results there. And now we wanted to take a look at the next clip from the course, which explores how we approach the issue of consent in the context of higher education.
A simple metaphor for consent is the idea of offering someone a cup of tea. If the person said no, said yes, and then fell asleep, or said yes and then changed their mind, you wouldn't make them drink the tea. Consent is much more than just saying yes or no. It's about body language, behaviour, and being informed about what you're agreeing to do.
There's a really good video on tea, and it's talking about how if someone offered you tea and they said no, you're not going to force them to drink that tea. And it's a really good video, but it's funny how it doesn't, even though I know a lot of schools get shown that, it doesn't really translate and stuff still happens. In the context of sexual intimacy, consent means that both people are okay with what's happening. It's as simple as that. If somebody says no, just they obviously don't want to do it, they're not comfortable with it, kind of respect their views and respect their feelings towards that.
We need to move beyond that, I think, to improve our understanding of it, to include enthusiasm, to include desire, and to be really honest with ourselves, being able to interpret body language and to want to interpret body language.
Actually, it's a sense of understanding that you're doing something with another person, not to them.
And of course, people can change their minds. You may be very intimate with someone, they may have given consent, and then they may change their mind. They have the right to change their mind. It's their body. So it's really listening to that person and engaging with that person.
Okay. Well, that clip really broke it down in a way that's clear and accessible, I felt, especially the tea metaphor. I think it's such a powerful way to explain the basic idea that if someone's not in a position to say yes or changes their mind, you don't push forward. And just remember, if you do want to see more of these courses, you can write E6 into the chat. Now, after watching that clip, Maurizio, what happens next in the course? How does the conversational learning aspect come into play here?
So this is where the value of the format kicks in. So straight away, the course poses open questions like, how would you define consent in the context of sexual intimacy? As I said before, it's not a quiz, it's a prompt that encourages the learner to pause and articulate in their own words what they took from the video and to explore the topic more broadly. The next few questions really guide them through deeper reflection. For example, what are some of the signs that someone is not giving consent? What are some of the examples of body language that might be signs of discomfort? You know, these aren't multiple choice, they're open-ended prompts designed to sort of generate self-awareness.
Wow, that's great. And there's also a question of how you'd respond if your partner seemed unsure. That feels like it encourages people to consider their actions in context and not just abstractly. Is that right?
Exactly. So that one is critical because it's not enough to just recognize when consent isn't there. You also need to think about how you handle that moment with care. Then we go one step further and ask, what advice would you give to someone who felt rejected after consent wasn't given? That opens space to think about emotional maturity and respect, something that often gets overlooked in these discussions.
Thank you. So the goal, I'd say, is really to develop understanding and emotional intelligence, not just legal awareness. And that brings us to our last poll for today. So our last poll question for today is, what kind of training solution would best support your institution in meeting E6 requirements? Is it traditional slide-based training with a quiz? Is it customizable training linked to internal policies? Is it video and scenario-based learning, fully interactive or reflective formats? Or not sure yet, and we're still exploring options. I'll repeat the question one more time. What kind of training solutions would best support your institution in meeting E6 requirements? Traditional slide-based training with a quiz, customizable training linked to internal policies, video and scenario-based learning, fully interactive or reflective formats, or we're not sure yet and still exploring options. We'll give everyone just another moment to write in their answers here and then see what the results were from our audience for this poll. Okay, so we have our results in here and nobody, that's 0% of respondents, said that they would think that traditional slide-based training with a quiz would be the best kind of training solution to support their institution in meeting E6 requirements, which does make sense as the requirements do require an interactive element. And 31% said that customizable training linked to internal policies would best support their institution. 20% said that it would be video and scenario-based learning that would be best. 17% said that fully interactive or reflective formats would be best. And 32%, which is a nice amount of respondents actually, said that they're not sure yet and they're still exploring options. So an interesting spread there. And I wanted to just go back to E6 for another moment, because at its core, I think this condition is really about one thing, and that's tackling harassment. That's so, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the driving ethos here. It's about shifting from what was there in the past, which is passive policies, to much more active prevention methods. And institutions are really expected to take significant and credible steps to stop harassment and stop sexual misconduct before it happens. That absolutely means proper training, accessible reporting tools, very visible support systems, and then clear expectations on behaviour across the board, from governors to staff to students. And that's why we mentioned here about OmniTrack, which is VinciWorks on tracking software, because it's not only a reporting tool, it's a data tracking tool. And that means you can actually prove to the OFS all of that you're meeting all of your requirements under E6. So not only that people have a place to report, but also you can track how many reports came in, from what source, how those were dealt with and handled. It gives you a single and comprehensive solution for all of that tracking reporting obligations under E6.
Thank you. That's really good to know that we have a solution for tracking and reporting on this data, but this new E6 condition isn't happening in isolation. There's actually a wider momentum across the workplace and additional regulations to think about regarding sexual harassment right now. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had from coming to force last year, the Worker Protection Act, which has been enforced since last October. And that puts a legal duty on all employers, including universities and colleges, to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of their staff. And that includes student-facing staff as well.
Thank you. And we do have a guide to all of your obligations under the Worker Protection Act. Remember that this covers all employers, including higher education providers, and the link for that guide is coming up in the chat now. So feel free to just to get your free instant download of the guide to the Worker Protection Act coming up in the chat now. So providers are now facing overlapping obligations. E6 covers student protection, including staff-student misconduct, and the Worker Protection Act focuses on staff protections.
That's right. So we've got E6, universities have to prevent and respond to any harassment or sexual misconduct affecting students. And that includes cases where the alleged perpetrator might be a member of staff. At the same time, the Worker Protection Act places a legal duty on the providers to protect staff from workplace harassment. So both sides of the student-staff dynamic are covered just through different frameworks.
Okay, thank you. And then what about the Employment Rights Bill?
So that's also very relevant here. The Employment Rights Bill is expected to be phased in from 2026, and that will raise the duty from the Worker Protection Act from reasonable steps to all reasonable steps to prevent harassment. That's a stricter legal threshold, and it means that learning providers will need to do even more to show that they're actively embedding those safeguards across student and staff settings. And what that really means is no half measures. So whether it comes to protecting staff and students, the law is moving in the same direction, expecting your provider to prevent harassment proactively. So if policies are weak or training is superficial or not done at all, then it's really not going to cut it anymore.
Thank you. And we also have a comprehensive guide to the specific health and safety provisions in the Employment Rights Bill, and the link to download that is coming up in the chat now. Now, with all the talk about frameworks and legal duties, we have to remember that behind all of this is real people and real experiences. Let's watch the next clip from our course, our final clip for today. And this one is a drama scenario that is in the staff pathway.
I was new to the role, and when you start in a new workplace, you don't really know what the culture is going to be like, along with you and other stuff.
We're a small team. It's always just been women. Don't ask me why, it's just one of those jobs that's always attracted women and not men.
Yeah, and then he walked in and we were all like, oh, he's quite nice. Like, we all thought it, we all did.
And you know, well, you can tell he goes to the gym because, well, you can just see that he does.
And then they were like, you look sporty. Then it was, show us your biceps. Let's see your biceps. And they just kept going on and on. So I did it. I wish I hadn't, which made it even more humiliating.
Like, I never touched him. I mean, not first. It was Anya, actually. So yeah, I wasn't the one to initiate anything or instigate anything, which is what everybody's saying. It was more her.
Is that what she said? Okay, that is not what happened. All I did was feel his arms. I mean, he tensed them, so I squeezed them like that. But it was Michelle who... Right, what she did, I would never have done.
And then the comments just got worse. Like, what kind of girls are you into? And then it was, what do you like to do? Always very sexual. Like, you couldn't have a conversation without it turning to sex. I bet you like doing this. I bet you like that.
Okay, and... you see them written out like that. Okay, that wasn't me who referred to his anatomy. Oh, hang on. I can't believe I said that. That's not the kind of thing that I would normally say.
And the weirdest thing was, they were all doing it. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. And I know what some guys are thinking, what's the big deal? But I know this sounds cliche, but they really made me feel like a piece of meat.
I don't know where she's getting this idea from either, because she was the one that was giving him massages like every 5 minutes. Look, I wouldn't have done what I did if it wasn't for the fact we'd just gone out for drinks. Like, we weren't even at work. Like, we'd gone off the premises, you know. And he wanted to tag along, so what's that telling you?
She can't deny it or blame anyone else. I mean, we all saw it, right? She literally dropped him.
It was just supposed to be a bit of fun.
So obviously I reported it, and that was off the scale, because actually they were doing it every day in plain sight. They let it happen. And by the way, what was it about me that made them think that all that was okay?
Wow, well, that was a powerful clip and quite difficult to watch in places. You can really see how the behavior starts off subtle and then escalates to something far more serious.
Yeah, so as you said, that drama scenario is taken from the staff pathway of the course, obviously, and it specifically looks at staff-on-staff harassment. We've incorporated different dramas in the relevant pathways wherever possible. And yes, it's designed to highlight the way in which, what seems maybe harmless at the outset can escalate, and also the impact on the individual, how problematic workplace cultures can take root, and the biases that led to this particular harassment. And that's where the course moves from observation into reflection and analysis.
Yeah, and what sort of questions are asked of the learner here?
So we start by asking things like, why do you think Leon became the target of sexual harassment? Why do you think the minorities are often targeted in this way? These prompt learners to consider the social dynamics and power imbalances in play. There's also behavioural focus. When does a compliment cross the line into something much more sinister?
Okay, those sound like great questions. And that one will hopefully get people really thinking about tone, intent, and repetition, and how those things can just add up.
Exactly. And then we ask, why do you think Leon didn't report it straight away? Which opens a space for learners to explore the barriers people face in real situations, the fear, the shame, not being believed. And of course, gender plays a role here as well as race. And then we provide a clear, grounded definition and a statement to close the loop, which we do with all the conversations, and confirm the learning, underlining the learning points where relevant, like in this instance, the legal definitions.
Okay, so the law is very clear on what harassment is, right, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sexual harassment is defined in UK law as unwanted conduct of a sexual nature that either violates someone's dignity or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. And crucially, it's about how the behaviour affects the recipient, not what the person intended. So so-called compliment, if it's sexual in tone, if it's repeated, and makes someone feel objectified, can absolutely cross the line. And employers do have a legal duty to act, even if the behaviour happens outside of work hours or on social media, as long as it's connected to the working relationship.
Okay, and so beyond the learning experience itself, I understand there are some additional features, Maurizio, that are built into the course?
That's right. So first, we've integrated optional data collection, as we mentioned, using the OmniTrack learning providers, which can add a short survey to capture anonymize learner feedback or track attitudes and awareness and incidence prevalence over time. That could be really valuable for evaluating all kinds of things, including a shift in the prevalence of these behaviors.
Thank you. And what about tailoring the course? I know somebody asked about that as well.
Absolutely, that's really important. The course can be customized, whether that's branding, adding institution-specific policies, or including local reporting pathways, i.e. the single comprehensive source of information. It's designed to be flexible to meet each provider's needs. And using our in-browser editor, it means that providers can edit text, add questions that they feel might be more relevant to their particular context, embed their own policies, all without needing to repackage the course or rely on us to do that for them.
So it's quick to localize and keep up to date?
Exactly. So it puts control in the provider's hands, which is especially useful with changing internal procedures or updates to policies. And I would just add that, you know, we're almost there. There's still a work in progress. We're almost finished with these courses. So those of you who do want demos, it might be a couple of days, but we'll get them to you as soon as we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Maurizio. And there's really just so much to talk about here, and we are coming up to time. We've had so many questions come in, and we want to get to them, as many of them as possible. If you are able to stay with us for another 5 minutes, please do so, and we can address as many of the points you've been raising. If you can't, then feel free to drop off, and you will receive a recording after the webinar is over. Okay, so just to begin to wrap up, the 1st of August is a key date. 2 distinct requirements are coming into force for HE providers: Condition E6 and the OFS's new free speech duties.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really the key date to remember. They're separate frameworks, but they're both mandatory. They both require clear, demonstrable action. One's focused on preventing harassment and sexual misconduct, the other on upholding lawful freedom of speech and academic freedom.
Okay, thank you. And so what should learning providers be doing now?
The first thing to do is finalize your single comprehensive source of information. That's a central policy hub that must be ready and accessible. I know we had a question in about what kind of format should that be in. I think it's good to have it in as many formats as possible. So if it's a hub, also have it as a document with links. So, you know, if someone asks to see it, you can actually give them to it in writing and paper as well. Then you want to schedule your training rollout so that staff and students are all going to be covered with training.
Great, thanks. And in terms of the new term in September, coming up in September?
Exactly. When everyone comes back in September, that's when you want to start your campaign around visibility, and then start planning communication strategy now. Emails, student portals, induction packs. Make sure students and staff know where to find the policies, how to report concerns, what support is going to be available. You want to include key details like hotline numbers, reporting platforms, links to support services, and do that across the campus to make sure it's very, very visible, and also make sure staff are briefed as well. So they're often going to be the first point of contact.
Okay, so in short, publish, train, communicate, and make the standards clear and accessible. Now we have a few minutes for questions, so let's take a look at a couple of questions that have come in. Nick, could you take us, the first one is for you. What does the board need to know in order to be assured it is compliant with E6?
So it's a great question, one that leadership teams should absolutely be asking. So at a minimum, the Board of Governors needs to be assured that the institution has fully implemented all of the key elements of Condition E6. We went through some of those above. Boards and Vice Chancellors should also be reviewing risk registers, asking for regular updates, seeking evidence of governance level oversight, because the OFS won't just look at whether policies exist, but whether leadership is actively engaged in compliance as well.
Thank you. And one last one for you, Maurizio. And I just want to mention that if for anybody that we were not able to get to your questions on the webinar today, we will do a blog post or get back to people by email who have asked questions and we haven't gotten to your question today. So that will be coming. So everybody's questions will be answered. But just one last one for now that came in. For you, Maurizio, is the training suitable for staff who don't work directly with students like admin or facilities teams?
Absolutely. So E6 applied across the whole board, not just academic or student-facing staff. The training is designed to be accessible and relevant for all roles. And again, remember that the staff version has content and learning relevant to the staff experience. So it's important whether or not you deal with students at all. And we always say, rather than, be faithful to the letter, just, err on the side of caution and broaden that, but broaden these type of trainings and interventions so that everyone is aware of it.
Thank you so much. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone for coming along and asking your questions and being with us on this session today. Thank you so much to our panelists, Maurizio Caldera and Nick Henderson-Mayo.